Good afternoon. Thank you for coming in person today, and thank you to those of you. I'm sure that we have many people currently watching online, and I know we're going to have many people watching back. This is an extraordinary event today. Events like this need to happen regularly, frequently, and often in the state of Illinois, in the city of Chicago, across the country, and quite frankly, across the world. There's nothing that we need more than to bring our members of Congress and our members of our different political parties to talk to the American public, both the highly engaged, distinguished and experts such as yourselves and people across the world. It's tremendously important. I am Leslie Vinjamori. I am new to Illinois. I hail originally from Omaha, Nebraska. I've been in Europe for 19 years, and I've just arrived on July 1st to lead the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, building on some very tremendous past presidents. So it is a really tremendous honor for me to be here. The event today, Global Affairs and Local Impact. Again, bread and butter, not only for our country and the world, but for this council, which, as you know, was founded in 1922. I'm still astonished every time I say that because it is such a remarkable history to do exactly what we are doing today. The council aims to foster a deeper understanding of global affairs and today's mounting global challenges. We are honored to have Congressmen Darin LaHood and Mike Quigley with us today for a conversation that will be moderated by NBC5's Mary Ann Ahern, who I imagine is very well known to all of you. I've just met her in the green room. I feel very fortunate. And they will be talking about the current state of global affairs and their local implications. So let me just briefly remind you what you already know, you here who are from. How many of you are from the great state of Illinois? Anybody not from Illinois? Okay, so wonderful. Welcome. Congressman Darin LaHood has represented Illinois in Congress since 2015, first serving the 18th district and currently representing the 16th district. I hope to get to all of these places quite soon. He serves on the Committee on Ways and Means, the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, and the Select Committee on Strategic Competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. Talk about some really important committees for the work of this council. Throughout his tenure, Congressman LaHood has focused on agriculture, economic development, fiscal responsibility, and national security. Congressman Mike Quigley has represented Illinois' 5th district in Congress since 2009. These are some deeply experienced people. He serves on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. So they're both, as you note, on the Intelligence Committee. Think about this as you think about your questions. He is also on the Committee on Appropriations, where he holds the position of ranking member on the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Subcommittee. Throughout his tenure, Congressman Quigley has focused on environmental protection, small business support, LGBTQ rights, healthcare access, and national security. So we couldn't have two more qualified people to join us in this conversation. Our moderator this afternoon, as I mentioned, Mary Ann Ahern of NBC5, has covered multiple campaigns from the White House to Springfield to Chicago. She has witnessed multiple mayoral transitions, and she has traveled throughout the primary states for 2008, remember when? 2012, 2016, who could forget? Mary Ann has gained recognition for covering the religion beat, breaking many stories related to the Roman Catholic Church. Her work has earned her several Emmy Awards. It's amazing to read this, actually. It's extraordinary, isn't it? Sometimes you have to pinch yourself and remember that it seems like every day at the council, but it is really remarkable. She is a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Chicago Headline Club in 2012. So we're going to start today with a discussion moderated by her. We're obviously on the record. We're live. When you ask your questions, which we ask that you hold until after the session, you too will be on camera and live. So fabulous questions, tremendous audience. And with that, I would like to invite Congressman LaHood and Quigley and Marianne out to the stage. And thank you for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you very much for having me here to the Council on Global Affairs. How interesting is this? We're going to have a fascinating discussion, I know. So good to see both a Republican and a Democrat sitting side by side to talk to us today. It doesn't happen every day. So that you are in a rare room in these days. It should happen more often. Let's start with, so many different global events. They're affecting communities, though, right here in Illinois. So, Congressman LaHood, let's start with you. When you're home in your district in Peoria, where I might say I was a Peoria reporter for many years, a long time ago. When you're home there, what are people asking you? What are people saying to you about global events? What do they care about?
Well, first of all, let me just thank the Chicago Council on Global Affairs for having this opportunity to be with my friend Mike Quigley and to have an opportunity to share with you some of our views on global affairs and how it affects our districts. And obviously want to welcome Leslie as the new chairperson and wish her, or CEO, wish her much success. To your question, Marianne, we just got out of session maybe 10 days ago back in our districts. And my district is a little different than Mike's. My district's fairly rural, covers 21 counties, but also the Peoria area, Bloomington Normal, Rockford, and then I cover 2/3 of the Wisconsin border and go over to the Iowa border also. A lot of issues come up as I travel around, but I would say first and foremost is trade and tariffs. That's a big issue affecting my farmers. My district's the 10th largest ag district in the country in terms of corn and soybean production. And we've had a lot of disruption when it comes to trade and tariffs. And about 40% of the corn and soybeans that are grown in my district go somewhere else around the world. They get loaded up on barges on the Illinois and the Mississippi River. They go down to New Orleans. They get offloaded on huge shipping containers, and they go all around the globe. So you don't always think about central Illinois or northern Illinois as being connected to the world, but we definitely are. I also have the largest concentration of Caterpillar workers anywhere in the world, about 12,000 Cat workers. And of course, Cat is a global company, and so we produce a lot of D10 tractors and excavators and mining equipment, and those are affected by trade and tariffs. And so we've had a lot of tariff regime yin and yang that have gone on through this year, and so that's been a big issue. I'm happy to talk a little bit more in depth about that, but trying to understand that is been tough for some people. And I would just say, for me, tariffs are taxes. They're taxes on my consumers, my farmers, my constituents. And I think tariffs should be used in a strategic and tactical way to go after bad actors. We shouldn't predicate our trade policy or our economic policy on tariffs, period. Now, when you have a bad actor, for instance, China, that plays by a different set of rules and standards, then I think tariffs should be used in a strategic and tactical way to go after them. I'm glad we're reaching some trade agreements. We just had an announcement this week with the EU, a market of $800 million between the US and the EU. That's a good thing. We have a new trade agreement with the UK, one with Vietnam, one with Indonesia. The more we can have resolution to that, the better, to calm the markets and bring predictability and certainty. That will be better for the country and better for my farmers.
And in contrast to that, you have a city district, obviously, but what are the issues internationally, globally, that are affecting your voters, your people in your district?
So I want to thank everyone for being here and the council for having it and being with my friend Darin. We do occasionally work together. We have a bill we're trying to pass on how the executive branch handles classified documents once they leave. Because what we've learned is that both people from both parties can do dumb things. And it's important for us to work on those sort of things together. It's interesting being on the Intel committee. You see the extremes of both parties. When we try to do things that address the public safety or some other controversials like trade, it often gets done in the middle. When I won a special election, Mark Kirk came up to me that day and said, anything that happens here gets done in the middle. So you better hope we get some common ground. And while Darin has a much larger district, mine goes from Navy Pier roughly to North Barrington. So I would argue it would take in rush hour longer to cross my district. Look, when you woke up this morning, you saw an orange-red sun, right? This is from Canadian wildfires. So there's a slew of things I could talk about them. But they're all in, I think, the coming questions. I think that one of the things this administration does is they move so quickly from so many multiple issues, it's hard to get the public to focus on any one of them, right? And I think the issue that's international, obviously global, that will affect our grandchildren the most is climate change. It's hardly being discussed. And yet we wake up every morning with an indication of a red, fiery sun, right? Obviously, I have a very large Ukrainian population, Eastern European diaspora, very concerned about Ukraine, all the reasons that were there, we'll get into. Very intense and agonizing conflict in Gaza and the West Bank, a very large Jewish population, Palestinian population. Those are all right here. And the last thing I'd say as it relates to trade and trying to catch this is FDR in his last inaugural said, we have learned that what happens over there affects us over here. And that to have a friend, you need to be one. So I think there's a theme here that we need to be cognizant of, that when you're focused on just your own country, it sometimes can blind you to the fact that the interconnection matters to solve all of our world's problems. Well, everything happening over here affects us here, over there affects us here, helping our constituents understand why they should care. It's the same reason I should care about the locks on the Mississippi that transport the grain leaving this country from Darin's district as he should about redoing the Blue Line or Lakeshore Drive or so many other projects we have to work on together.
All right, so let's talk about that. You mentioned already tariffs, Congressman LaHood, and the economy is, of course, the top issue for voters so often, and it was in the last election. And you've said they're taxes, but do you believe that this current approach is the way? Is this helping Americans or is it hurting Americans?
Well, I think the quicker we can have a resolution is going to help America when it comes to the trade and tariff regime that's currently being going on. Because I think if you look at the last 6 months, it's been a lot of green light, red light, and not knowing what the policy is. I also think it's hard for people to conceptualize why we're in a trade war with our allies, right? One of the biggest trade agreements that President Trump signed during his first term was USMCA. It came through the Ways and Means Committee, worked an awful lot on that, bipartisan. It's been a tremendous asset to the U.S. So now we have tariffs on Canada and Mexico. Why? Now, I'm all for bringing jobs back to the United States and protecting the United States. But I think we also got to recognize that we have allies that we want to support and work with, and we have a trade agreement on that. So I think we got to continue to work on a resolution for these trade agreements and get to a point where tariffs aren't infringing on our friendship and our relationship between the United States and our allies on that. We're working towards that. But again, the sooner we can get that done, the better. And I think it'll be good for the economy. Because I would argue President Trump got elected on two main issues last November, fixing the economy and illegal immigration. And on fixing the economy, how do we know whether that works or not? I think we probably won't know for a little while here, but as long as inflation is still high, interest rates are high, energy prices are high, I don't think we're going to have a resolution. And that's directly tied to trade and tariffs. I think it's also tied to taxes and a regulatory environment. The economy is really a three-legged stool. And I think it's those three legs: taxes, regulatory environment, and trade and tariffs. And if we want the economy to take off and fulfill that campaign promise, then you got to work on the trade and tariffs.
Congressman Quigley.
I think Darin's right. There are very important uses, legitimate uses for tariffs. If a company is being subsidized by country like China, or if they're dumping a product here, there's reasons to do that. There's also punitive sanctions, if you will. And it's sort of tragically ironic that we haven't done Russia yet, more than when the administration started, and that probably should have been our first stop. But what's concerning to me with the American economy is Hershey, Procter & Gamble, and Mondelez have said their prices are going to have to start going up, right? And these are bread and butter. You got to buy this stuff every week stuff for the American people. And this is, fundamentally the issue. I mean, the most recent poll I've seen in Chicago, 2nd Congressional District, what was the number one issue? The cost of living. So I think this is, as Darin said, it's a tax, but it's actually worse than that, because the manner in which it's being done with sort of a whipsaw back and forth effect creates an uncertainty, and I've had people much smarter than me on these things say, I can plan to move forward with the economy and figure out how to do these things if I know it's a good market or a bad market. But if I don't know what's next, that's a problem. It takes a long time to shift markets, right? You're going to start building aluminum in the United States. The extraordinary amount of power that it takes, what you're going to have to do with supply chains takes a dear 10, 12 years. And I think for a lot of those investors, they're going to say, what certainty do we have? How do I know what the next administration is going to do? Later I think you want to talk about this whipsaw effect. I think that's part of this. We are having administrations that are just so night and day different, follow each other. It's very hard to address this. There's much more to talk about with tariffs. But back to my original point, and what Darin said, why are we doing this with our allies, right? We're creating higher costs, uncertainty, and we're alienating our friends. Why are people our friends? I'm on the Intel committee. The first time I got briefed outside of this country, I met with a group of veteran spies in Rome. And, they talked about what I need to know at the time. And I said, well, why do people betray their country and tell you things that are committing treason, things that keep us and our allies safe? To a person, grizzled, pretty conservative folks said the same thing. Because the United States is more than a country, it's an idea. It sounded a lot like Ronald Reagan talking to me, right? I now seem to be longing for some of those days, right? But if we antagonize our friends, and we got to ask ourselves, who are our friends right now? And they're so important to us as veterans of the Intel Committee, and they share vital information. I don't care how big their army is or their GDP for that, as compared to some of them providing us information that keeps our troops safe, keeps us safe, and our allies. Antagonizing them for no apparent reason is just a horrible mistake. And I guess the worst example of all is the one on Brazil. Here we have this huge surplus with Brazil, and for what can only be seen as an anger for the fact that they're prosecuting their former president that our president likes, he's inflicting a trade against a country that we have a surplus with. And by the way, a surplus deficit, having a deficit with a country isn't necessarily a bad thing. They may have a lot of things we just don't have, but those are critical supply to our supply chains.
Let's move on to, we talked about Illinois being the home to manufacturers, to farmers. You brought up the grain. 30 years ago, as a reporter in Peoria, I followed that grain down a barge, down the Mississippi, watched that at the Cargill and all the places where Central Illinois was the breadbasket, probably still is, to the world. What about that? How are the current trade tensions and those supply chain disruptions how is that impacting Illinois workers?
Well, I would just say on China in particular, I serve on our select committee on China, which is a bipartisan committee focused on how do we win the strategic competition against China. And I think it's emblematic in your question, Marianne, on the relationship with China. We have the two largest economies in the world. And we are intertwined at every level. The problem is China plays by a different set of rules and standards than every other industrialized country in the world. And, if you go back roughly 21, 22 years ago when we allowed China into the World Trade Organization, Mike and I were not in Congress at the time, but the argument about allowing China into the World Trade Organization went something like this. Bring them into the World Trade Organization, they're going to modernize their economy. They're going to liberalize. They may democratize. They're going to become more like us. They're going to be a willing partner like everybody else. Fast forward 21, 22 years, none of that has happened the way that it was described. So in many ways, we've been duped under Democrat and Republican administrations by the Chinese and the Communist Chinese Party. And if anything, Xi Jinping, in my view, has doubled down on authoritarianism. And if you listen to his wolf warrior diplomacy, which he espouses around the globe, or the digital Silk Road, or what they've done with BRICS, all of these things have been antagonistic in many ways to the United States, but we're still intertwined economically. But when you have a country that doesn't abide by those same rules and standards, how do you hold them accountable? The only thing that gets their attention is tariffs, some sanctions, some export controls. It's the only thing they listen to. And listen, is a trade war with China detrimental to my farmers? Of course it is. Because when you get into a trade war, the first pawn in the trade war is agriculture, because we always have a surplus. So when China cuts off that soybean market, that means they're going to go to Brazil. It's not good for my farmers. And I always say my farmers are the most patriotic people that I know. But it's how much economic pain can they take by cutting off those markets? So it's the yin and yang of holding China accountable, getting them to change their behavior. The last point that I will make is, and I don't say this to scare people, but China has a plan to replace the United States. And they're working at it every single day. They want to beat us technologically, militarily, economically, and from a diplomatic standpoint. And so now we're in this point where we're intertwined at every level. I don't know that decoupling, we hear a lot about decoupling, de-risking as a policy. We've heard that under multiple administrations. I'm not sure that's possible without strong economic pain. But is there a way to hold them accountable by using tariffs to get their attention? And I think that's what we're in the middle of.
Do you agree?
Look, I agree with much as what he said about China. And that's a country that should have opened these discussions and not led with everybody in the same boat. So back to the original question, which was, what am I hearing? From car dealers, what are the manufacturers doing? Some of them are passing the tariff costs on immediately. Some of them are biding some of that, but they can't do it forever. And now that most of those inventories that were there are gone, you heard the sales pitch, pre-tariff sales. If that becomes your main pitch, you have a hard time selling cars. I hear from small businesses, retailers, small manufacturers, that the uncertainty affects investment and affects what they decide to do. Should they invest big in this plant? What's that going to mean? How much is it going to cost to do this? And will the next administration just change everything back? And what the hell did we just do? So just to give you the one example, the Cato Institute, a pretty conservative think tank, their analysis is in Asian countries that had deals with the United States, this has meant they are now shifting more of their trade deals and their trade to China. So there's a web of complexity here that frankly, the administration just didn't think about when they went headlong into this and what it would mean. How long does it actually transform to build a complex manufacturing institute and programs here in the United States?
But do you give up? Do you give up and say that China does that better than us, so let's not do that?
No, I mean, this is a thoughtful process in the game, right? In the end, as we talk later, and Darin has said, we are so intertwined with them. It's a competitive process, but you still have to. The world's two largest economies, so much of what we get that are involved with our supply chains and what we purchase, frankly, comes from China. So to think, and the debt, so to think that we can just say that we're out of this with you, we're going to quit, it doesn't work at all. It'd be devastating to both economies and to the worldwide economy.
All right, so Illinois faces a double challenge. We have lost some major headquarters, Caterpillar's still based in Peoria, but has certainly downsized. Boeing came here and now has left, while other manufacturers compete globally against countries like China that heavily subsidize their industries. What policies could help Illinois in making sure that these businesses succeed, not just here, but also internationally?
Let me start, and then at the end, I'm going to get myself in trouble here. We need to produce a lot more energy. We need to produce a lot more housing. We need to lower cost. We need to stop disinvesting in our major universities, especially the research ones. We need to spend a lot more capital in trade schools and junior colleges. You know, I get the tours at Ahern and airlines begging us to produce people who can fix their planes, and the extraordinary amount of good jobs that come from that, putting our money where our mouth is. But we have all the resources. What a hub we are, where we are in the world. If it rolls, floats, or flies, it comes through Chicago. We mentioned earlier when the convention happened, my colleagues from Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Southern California, they looked out over Lake Michigan and go, oh my God, you can't see across. Well, of course, but it's just such an extraordinary asset, right? And that's where you're going to want to be for all those things when you face the challenges of global warming. I think the last thing is, and this is for both parties, whatever anybody says about the Trump administration, and I'm leading it because I have a lot of problems with them, we have to clean up our own house. Our governments need to be a lot more efficient. I spent 10 years at Cook County writing reports how to reimagine government. Not because I'm Doge, hate government, we need to make it smaller, but because out of sheer necessity, the fiscal pressures, the fiscal cliff that we are facing, if we don't reimagine, redefine, and do things differently, it will not matter who's in D.C. Obviously, it does, but we have to do all those things, and we just have to come into this cycle of corruption. Since I've been in, 39 aldermen have gone away. We've had Democratic, Republican governors go to jail. And, you know, I hear the jokes in D.C. What did one Illinois prisoner say to the other? The food was better here when you were governor. and this is from guys from Jersey telling me these jokes. So, you know, final point. It's not the real cost of corruption isn't the money. That's a big factor. It's the loss of the public trust. We're going to have to make real tough choices in D.C. They're going to have to make really tough choices in Springfield and worse in the city council. The public has to know we're doing it because it's the right thing to do, not for some other reason. Without that trust, it's going to be so much harder to do that. That's the number one thing we need to do.
Congressman LaHood, any policies that would benefit these companies like CAT and Boeing?
I'm a fourth generation Illinoisan. My wife and I raised our three boys in Illinois. I love Illinois. I love the state. I love my district. But I got to tell you, watching the last 25 years in Illinois has been very frustrating. Because I would just say elections have consequence. One party rule in Springfield, I don't think has been beneficial to the state of Illinois. And I say that because my district borders Wisconsin and Iowa, and I see what other states are doing. And when I grew up, Illinois used to lead the Midwest in almost every category, right? Population, innovation, schools, everything. And now what do we lead in? We're the out-migration state #1 in the country of people that are leaving the state of Illinois, going to Wisconsin or Indiana or to Florida to spend 6 months in a day. We now have the second highest combined state and federal taxes. Our property taxes are through the roof in Illinois. And it would be different if we had a surplus, but we're $140 billion in unfunded liability in our pension system. That falls all on U.S. taxpayers. Now, I hate all these statistics, but that's the reality. And you look at what other states have done in terms of a better business climate, reducing their pension obligation, focusing on how do you have a better business climate? How do you attract talent? How do you keep them there? We haven't done that. And that is frustrating to see people fleeing Illinois because of those policies. And so I think we need to refocus on, again, business climate, you can't go across America without going through Illinois. We have a great transportation system, our rail system, our airports, our roadways, our river system is first class. We have some of the best institutions of higher learning in the entire country right here in Illinois. We have an educated workforce, but we've had very bad policy when it comes to a business climate. That's just not me saying that. Talk to the Chamber of Commerce, talk to business owners. You talk to a company, if they could start their company anywhere, would it be in Illinois now? Most of them would say no, because there's 49 other choices that have a lot better options.
All right, let's shift to the conflict in Gaza. It has certainly created divisions within the parties and among your constituents, I would imagine as well. How do you navigate representing districts with Jewish communities, Arab American communities? Then you have the college campuses. Both of you have districts that have very strong feelings and different sides. With those divisions, what should America's strategy be in the Middle East moving forward? Congressman LaHood.
Well, I would say a couple things. There is no place for terrorism that has been executed by Hamas, particularly in the Gaza. There is no place for the heinous activities that Hamas has been engaged with. Go back to October 7th and others. I have supported Israel. They are our number one ally in the Middle East. Doesn't mean they're perfect, but we got to continue to support them. But, everything isn't just Gaza. If you look at our relationship with lots of other Sunni countries in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, UAE, those are countries we have very good relationships with in the Middle East. But you also can't stand by while people are starving, which is currently going on in Gaza. We have to be benevolent and generous in terms of food and nutrition that should go to the Gazan people. And I know that's happening there. But there can be no place for the type of terrorist activities that Hamas is engaged with, period, full stop, in my view. We need to have all the hostages returned. There needs to be a ceasefire. We should work on getting that done. And then we got to figure out what's the next solution for Gaza in the Middle East and how we get there. I will give President Trump a lot of credit for the Abraham Accords. And maybe what happens in this administration on the Abraham Accords. If you look at the Abraham Accord with Morocco or Bahrain or UAE or with Sudan, I think that's created an alliance in the Middle East that is good. I will also say Iran is the only state sponsor of terrorism, and their malign activities, whether it's the Houthis in Yemen, whether it's supporting Hamas in Gaza, whether it was supporting Nasrallah and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, the Shia proxies in Iraq, or Assad in Syria. They continue to engage in state sponsor of terrorism, and that cannot be tolerated. And so I give a lot of credit to Israel and President Trump for taking out their nuclear capabilities in Iran and doing it in a strategic and tactical way, not putting us into a war. A weakened Iran is better for the Middle East. But we got to figure out a game plan moving forward. So how we unite the Middle East, if we can do that, and partner with our like-minded allies to create economic opportunities and alliances to move forward.
Congressman Quigley.
We preface what we say typically with our understanding of the horrors of Hamas and what took place in October, and that Israel has every right to defend itself, but the manner in which they do that matters. The hostages have to be released. I will continue to vote to support Israel. But tomorrow I'm going to release a statement that the United States needs to recognize a Palestinian state. I do this because you can't forever say, I favor a two-state solution if you don't start at some point in time. Now, clearly, there are a lot of things that have to happen before it is an actual state. But I was very pleased that the Arab League came out and said Hamas needs to disarm, and they recognized the need to install a stabilization mission, are the words that they use. So all that has to happen. But first, I take the president at his word. We need to feed people. And he said, if we have to do it ourselves, we will. Okay. I think it's probably easier, given the circumstances, if the Arab League takes that up. I don't I don't know that we can get in a situation where UNRWA does it again for the United Nations, but really nothing else matters when kids are starving to death.
What got you to this point?
I walked through the streets of Gaza many years ago after an incursion and a conflict, and I saw the extraordinary cynical use of civilians by Hamas and recognized they have to be eliminated. But in time, you begin to understand that Hamas isn't an army, it's a movement. And the way Netanyahu is conducting this war is almost nothing short of a greatest recruiting tool for Hamas. So I get that for some that's just so unfair, but in the final analysis, you have to look at what's taking place and say, you have to end the hunger right now. People have to be safe, right? You are never going to, in the manner in which you're doing this, in this conflict. So it is going to have to be the rest of the world. I'm also on the State and Foreign Ops Subcommittee. They gave it a new name. We met with 20 ambassadors in one fell swoop, in one meeting, and they all said the same thing. We support Israel, but this can't keep going. It's in Israel's interest for its own survival to recognize the need for mutual security from the rest of the world for both the Palestinian state and Israel. People say, oh, that's never worked. It's never happened. So that's what's brought me, is this inevitability can't be tomorrow and tomorrow. It has to start now. And you said how tough this is with your constituents. This is the most agonized I have seen the Jewish community, and the most pained anyone could have imagined, the Arab and Palestinian community. And you have to respect and appreciate, listen to everyone. But in the final analysis, we just can't keep doing the same thing we're doing. We have to enforce all those international laws. And we have to mention, in the West Bank, those threats, that hostility is wildly unacceptable. So to ask for an investigation because one American is killed, right? It has to be because if you're going to have a two-state solution, you can't let Netanyahu, who seems now to be emboldened that he can annex the West Bank. Someone has to stop this madness because we're at the brink of a point of no return, especially in the West Bank.
Well, when you talk about madness, what about Ukraine? What do you see there? And both of you, actually.
Yeah, look, I'll just say the president has now had 6 timelines that Putin's, blown past. And I don't think the president is naive, but he's written, I thought I could take Putin. I thought he meant what he said. And I don't think he really wants to win this war. Glorioski. You can't trust a bloody tyrant, right? The president has never said who he wants to win the war, right? Here's what Putin understands. Force, strength, action, not some statement on a social media platform. Oh, he's quaking at that. And then the saber rattling, never directly with Putin, with, bringing new subs there. Look, this is an important conflict since the Second World War in Europe. And General Milley, Secretary Austin, both said it correctly. This is a strategic and a moral imperative. So Putin will understand if President Trump says, all right, we're going to do another supplemental, because about 40% of the Russian economy is now running into this war. He will play the game of attrition and win, but he can't do it forever if the United States and NATO are allied and tell Putin that's going to be the case. That's the only way Putin will come to the table, because right now he's still at the maximalist demands and he's still escalating the war instead of bringing it back.
Congressman Hood, where are you on Ukraine?
Well, I am very glad that President Trump has given them the Patriot defense system that they need and is beginning to rearm them. Putin is a thug. He is a dictator. He is an international criminal and needs to be treated as so. He is blatantly untrustworthy. I'm the sponsor of the House bill on sanctions, which we continue to get co-sponsors on that. I think that's the direction we need to go to get his attention, particularly sanctions on oil moving forward. And so I have supported funding for Ukraine. Now, a lot of my constituents want to know, how can you justify spending billions and billions and billions of dollars on a country on the other side of the world when, we're $37 trillion in debt? And I think that's a fair question. And I've struggled with that a little bit. But the fight for the democracy in Ukraine, freedom-seeking people against a tyrant like Putin, I think is worth doing it. And there's no U.S. troops on the ground there. There's not blood being spilled by U.S. Americans over there. This is by brave Ukrainians fighting for freedom, fighting for independence, fighting for sovereignty. And let's go back to what happened, on the invasion. This was a independent, sovereign, democratically elected country that was blatantly invaded by no justification, legal or otherwise, none. And you look at the pattern of Putin, whether it's in Georgia, whether it's in Chechnya, whether it's in Crimea, whether it's in Syria, or whether it's now in Ukraine. It is a pattern of a dictator invading sovereign territory or sovereign countries. That simply cannot be tolerated in the world we live in today.
Last thought, there's $300 billion in frozen Russian assets in Europe that can be used to rebuild that country and defend it. $9 billion of it in the United States.
Wow. Before we get to your questions, that we will very soon, news of the day here, but it could impact globally, is what's going on in Texas with the Texas Democrats coming to Illinois for refuge. They don't want to vote on the redistricting map, which could lead to a issue perhaps across the country if everybody's going to redo their map in the middle of the term instead of doing it every 10 years. Where do you stand on what's going on there?
Well, let me just back up. I think in Illinois, it's a little bit hypocritical because we have one of the most gerrymandered maps in the country. That's not me saying that. That's Princeton University has come out and looked at. So we've had blatant gerrymandering in the districts that Mike and I serve in. Illinois used to be a very bipartisan congressional district. It's now 14-3, right? They created 3 super red districts. I'm in one of those red districts, but it was politicians in Springfield picking their voters instead of voters picking their politicians. So what we did in Illinois is blatant gerrymandering. It cannot be justified, and hopefully there'll be an effort to overturn that in Illinois. So I say that because both parties do this and engage in this, and I'm not following what's going on in Texas, but I think doing redistricting halfway through the decade, I think is, I don't think we should get in the pattern of necessarily doing that. I also have concerns about the constitutionality of redoing a map with the voters' rights. The Voting Rights Act being prescribed as part of that redistricting. So this will eventually end up in court moving forward. But
is this a concern that some see that President Trump is worried about the midterm election and so therefore trying to find more Republican seats to hold on to the House?
Well, obviously, Texas is controlled by Republicans, just like Democrats are controlling Springfield. And it seems to me that, they're looking at a political advantage in Texas by doing this redistricting.
And what about it? Can there ever be a fair map?
Sure. There's a federal bill. There's a bill in Congress that outlaws maps like this. If you want a bipartisan solution to this, there is legislation. And if it's not perfect, this is the time to sit and talk about it. How do you draw fair maps? I have served 3 terms in the minority when in that election, more Americans voted for a Democrat for Congress than a Republican by a wide margin. So there's a solution to this. And, in a perfect ideal world, there's a bipartisan panel that draws maps the way they do in some states. And it's based on constitutional mandates, not political whims. So obviously the fact that you're doing it midterm makes it just worse. And you're dragging everything to the bottom. And I just don't, I think the Democrats are probably thinking, why should we unilaterally surrender? But we'd be all better off if it just took a beat and looked at this piece of legislation and said, if we're serious about this, let's see what the public really wants.
All right, let's take a look at what the crowd really wants. Do we have questions out here? I'm sure we do. If we up here, I believe there's someone right here in the front.
Hi, I'm Dwayne Deskins. I have a quick question. Best case, worst case. If everything stays the same in terms of tariffs, geopolitical politics, and remains that for the next 4 years, tell me what you think Chicago or the rest of Illinois will look like. Best case and worst case. Not what you hope for, just remains the same as it is right now.
That's a little bit of a hypothetical, but I'll attempt to answer that. I mentioned there's been trade agreements with a number of countries and entities. I hope there's a lot more of those. But if we stop right now and there's none, I think there's going to be consequences to the ag sector on that, with our ag commodities being subject to tariffs and a trade war. And that's not going to be good for our farmers or the cost of commodities. So I have concerns about that. Now, is a resolution of some of these trade irritants going to bring more manufacturing and help more jobs here and the growth of manufacturing? That could be a very positive thing if we're able to reach agreement in these trade agreements on that. So it's how it's done. It's the way that it's done. I would never bet against the United States. I think we're the greatest country in the world economically, from a national security standpoint and otherwise. But you got to make sure that you're looking out for the best interest of workers, economic and otherwise. So we just didn't end up in this trade tariff war. This has been over the last 20, 25 years, 30 years, and it has to be right-sided at some point. It's, again, how much economic pain we can go through to do that. I'm hopeful that we can get a resolution to many of these things and get us on a glide path to a stable economy that brings certainty and predictability for my farmers and manufacturers.
Was your question just about trade?
Actually, no, it was about trade and also geopolitical issues.
Oh, okay. Darin and I both voted for a trade bill under President Trump, North American trade bill, which was perfectly fine. I was one of 26 Democrats to put on my unicorn and vote for President Obama's trade proposal. When we voted that down, and I had been to the Pacific Rim a lot of times talking to those countries.
This was TPP, right?
That's right. They were begging us to do a trade deal because they wanted somebody to trade with that wasn't China, right? And we alluded earlier that economic power is military power. So we were ceding, by effect, military power to China because we couldn't get past ourselves on the notion that trade can be a good thing. And again, who opposed it? It's really the folks on the extremes here in both parties. They always said trade bills passed by 1 or 2 votes in the middle. Where are we going to be? It depends on how many people are willing to take tough votes on reauthorizations on Intel stuff, right? On economic things. That's just not the safe vote. So I'll let Darin speak to his party. My party needs to recognize that too. They need to be truth tellers of where the situation is. I think you can underestimate the American people. I think they want authenticity. I think they want us to tell us what we think is the truth. I know people who vote against me, even though they vote for me, even though they disagree with me. I think we need to do that times 100, or none of this is going to work in Chicago or Illinois or in the United States. In the United States, massive trade problem. The only time we've ever voted on it that I can remember is Simpson Bowles, Cooper Latourette. 36 members voted for it in the federal side. We've never really dealt with it, never come to terms with it at the state or the city council level. All that has to happen, or we're in real trouble, as you say, 2 years, 4 years, or 10 years from now.
Another question. Yes, right here.
You've spoken, both of you, very respectfully, thoughtfully, carefully. We now have leadership who never uses that tone of voice. You, Representative LaHood, talked about Xi as being aggressive and authoritarian. And when I read the newspapers, that's how my leader, our leader, sounds to me. at the council several months ago, we heard from the man who wrote Choke Points. And in reading that book, we realized, economic warfare can only work if you have allies. And as you've spoken, you've said we've thrown out all of our allies. Now, I know I'm taking too long.
And your question is?
How do we change this? How do we operate with leadership who's always feisty, who's never dependable, who often lies? How do people like you operate with him?
Well, a couple things. One is I'm elected by the 730,000 people in the 16th Congressional District. They elected me for a 2-year term. I'm their voice in Washington. And I always say I have 3 important parts of my job is 1, voting on behalf of those 730,000 every time I go to Washington, D.C. 2nd is good constituent service. And 3rd is being a cheerleader for my district that I represent, which is much different than Mike's district or a district in Los Angeles or other things. But we live in a democracy, right? And for 250 years, it's not perfect by any means. It is a work in progress. We take sometimes 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But we had an election last November. And you can say what you want about the election, but President Trump won all 7 swing states, won a majority of the vote, won a record number of Hispanic males, African American males. And we can but the election happened. There was no improprieties with the election. Democracy held. We may not like the results. And now we have the House, the Senate, and the White House. Now, I have an oversight role. I take my legislative responsibilities important. It's an important part. Oversight, how I vote on behalf of my district, I do that. I play one role in government on that. But in our democracy, the people spoke. And until we have another election in 2026 for the Congress and the Senate or the White House, that's our democracy. And as you look at the history of this country, there have been ups and downs and ups and downs. But the voters will decide on what direction we go and how that happens. And people will have different opinions on that moving forward.
We want to get another question in. Over here. Yes, sir. Right here.
Hi, I have a question I think Marianne is going to like, but I'm not optimistic that I'm going to get an answer. But here
I
we
watched
go.
5, 7, 9, 2.
Yeah. Okay, so Chicago is desperate for intelligent, competent, sensible leadership. Desperate. So my question is for Congressman Quigley, won't you please consider running for mayor in 2027?
You stole my last question. I wasn't framing it quite that way. But yes, my question was, and really to both of them, tomorrow
He's not running for mayor.
No, tomorrow is the first day that you can get your petition signed. So in your case, what are your plans? Are you running for re-election?
I am passing petitions to run for re-election. Here's what I'm looking at. People are asking the wrong questions right now. They're talking about horse races with polls. It's just madness, right? It's a Senate race. And what's the most likely answer? I don't know. I don't know who all these folks are. It's really what are they thinking and how much are they willing to sacrifice? So I don't know for sure where I'm going to be in 2 years, but I'm going to tell you what I want to do in the next 5 weeks that I'm here a lot. We haven't been home much in this year. So I'm going to just let it rip. If you recall that 10 years I had at the county was at some political peril. So whether people agree with it or not, I'm going to take this time and I'm going to speak with groups this Thursday. I'm a city club and anybody else will have me. And I'm going to tell them exactly how bad things are and what we're going to have to do. But the question isn't who are they for? It's what are they for? And what are they willing to go through? And what do they really understand what the challenges are? I think people want hope. So you can't just tell them everything's terrible. You have to tell them things are really bad. And we have to be honest with ourselves, right? What I said at the beginning is true. It can't be who the president is right now. Right now it has to be, what are our tough choices when these cuts come and the fiscal cliffs come and we have those stark realities? And what's wrong with us? The theme is, how do we clean up our own act and do much, much better? So, I want to get a sense of how the public reacts to that, with how long I want to serve in public office. I will tell you, I serve with a lot of people. If I served twice as long as I already have, I would still be younger than them. That's true. I will not do that. And I will say that same hand, Nancy Pelosi was probably our best speaker, and she all through her 70s. But, I think it's egotistical to think nobody else could do what you do for all time. So I'm just being honest. I'm looking at all this. But the question isn't what I want to do. The question is, where are we? And what does the public think about these things? What are they willing to do, assess, sacrifice to get to a greater goal? And right now, for a city, state, and county, it's got to be, we have to get past this horrible situation we're in to move forward together. And it's going to have to be all of us, as corny as it sounds, working together.
Sounds like it's a maybe. It's a maybe. I would take that as a maybe. And what about you, Congressman? What are you going to be doing?
Well, to give you an idea of how quickly our elections come along, Mike and I got sworn into a new term this past January 4th. And tomorrow we're taking out petitions to run again next year. So, less than, a little over 6 months, we're already turning around getting petitions to run in next year, March's primary, and then November 26th. So it just starts immediately in terms of running. We still have a lot of work to do. Fulfilling the economic promises that we made in last year's election, we have to do that. That was what came out of this election. So how do we bring down the tariff problems we had? How do we get the economy back on track? How do we bring relief to the American people? Lower energy costs, lower taxes, more money in people's pockets. We have to work on all that. So there's plenty of things we got to do. But I always say when I speak to school groups, what is our job? What I always think about our job is, how do we keep the American dream going in this country? And what do I mean by that? I often think about my great-grandparents immigrated from a small town in Lebanon to Peoria, Illinois. They came through Ellis Island. They got on a train coming through Ellis Island. Last stop on the train was Kewanee, Illinois, outside of Peoria. Didn't speak any English, didn't have any money, had a strong faith in God and the American dream. And everybody in this room has somebody in their background that has come to America and struggled so that we could live the lives that we live in this country. And as you know, America is only 4.5% of the world's population in a country of over 8 billion people. But we live in the greatest country in the world. We have lots of problems. We're not perfect. There's lots of things we need to work on. But it's still the greatest country in the world. And it's no coincidence people want to come here illegally and legally because of what we have here. And there's only one American dream. We hear about American dream all the time. There's only one American dream. There's not a European dream or a China dream or a Russia dream or an Africa dream. There's one dream, the American dream. So the work that we do when we pop our head up and look around and go, well, how do we protect that American dream? That you can still come from any lot in life in this country. And if you work hard and you play by the rules and you get an education and you're patriotic, you can do anything you want. You can become a 5-star general. You can become president of the United States. You could become an Emmy-winning announcer.
You could become perhaps a governor or senator. Which one would you like to become?
My point is,
and the answer is,
my point is that that those are all things that we have a responsibility to do to keep that American dream going, so the next generation and the generation after that can continue to have those opportunities. And so I look forward to passing petitions tomorrow on my reelection to the 16th Congressional District.
Sounds like a maybe to me.
That's no to governor and senator then.
I'm filing for Congress tomorrow.
All right. Well, that is news, I should tell you. That is news. It was really delightful, isn't it? It is so rare to get to speak to both a Republican and a Democrat who are so knowledgeable. Really, I learned a lot, and I believe all of us here today did. Thank you very much.
I want to thank our staffs who keep us going with all this, too. Yay! Marshall and Victoria are out there. Yay! And thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.